Welcome everyone. Again, my name is Morgan Veth here at Bogart Wealth. I'm one of the financial advisors, certified financial planner, and been in the industry for coming up on 19 years. So we'll cover quite a bit today. Just kind of start with a brief intro about Bogart, and then our topic of the day, estate planning and charitable giving as well. You will see there is a Q&A box in Zoom. I will try my best to kind of be vigilant and watch those. So if you do have any incoming questions, certainly pop them into the Q&A box there, or let us know. If you already work with us, follow up with your financial advisor if there's a topic or something you want to dive into a little bit more that we hit on today. All right, so okay, so again, topic for today is going to be estate planning. The title doesn't say it, but we are going to cover charitable giving as well. So just a bit about Bogart. If you are new to us or not familiar, we are a registered investment advisory firm. Our mission is to really help provide peace of mind for our clients and also optimize any intergenerational wealth. So optimizing wealth for your family as well. We have about $2.7 billion that we are trusted with managing for our clients and support over 1,300 families. We do custody our assets at Charles Schwab, but are an independent fee-only fiduciary. Here's just a bit of our team. We have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to scoot through this pretty quickly. James Bogart, our CEO and founder, as many of you know, and here's others of our leadership team. I am sitting in McLean, Virginia, and that's where our headquarters is. So many of the faces you'll see here are in McLean near me as well. Our advisory team, so we do have 3 locations, so McLean and 2 in Texas as well. So some of the advisors are here in Virginia, some in Texas. Our portfolio management team, as we do manage assets in-house. So this is the team that is entrusted with making those tough decisions on what we want to own and the allocation of the portfolios. Our client services team, and our financial planning team as well. As many of you know, we always start with a financial plan. That is really at the core and the heart of what we do and where we kind of start any conversation with clients. And here's the great team that supports us in providing those financial plans. And then, our HR training, our marketing team is helping to put this together. So a lot of people to keep Bogart running efficiently. And again, here's just kind of our 3 offices or locations that we have. We do quite a bit of webinars like these, as well as podcasts. So on our website, there's actually a neat little library where even today, this will be recorded. So, feel free to check that out if there's a topic that you're interested in, or if there's something that you don't see, let us know if it's something you feel like would be a great presentation for us to do. So let's talk about, kind of the outline of today and how we're going to spend the next kind of hour together. So we'll discuss what is an estate plan, who needs an estate plan, the basics and considerations, as well as estate planning documents. So what are some of those documents that actually make up your estate plan? So let's start with what is an estate plan. So it is essentially a map that reflects your wishes, the way you want your personal and financial affairs to be handled in case of incapacity or death. So it is a crucial plan to have in place. No one wants to think about it or talk about it. That I do understand, but incredibly important to make sure that things are transferred and your wishes are seen. Who needs an estate plan? Everybody. I'm sure we can make the case for maybe one individual that does it, but for the most part, everyone needs an estate plan. It's not just for the ultra wealthy. I feel like, minimizing estate taxes, which we'll talk about taxes today and estate taxes, that's usually at the forefront of everyone's mind, I find, when they're thinking about a trust or estate plan, really wanting to kind of mitigate those, which is important, and we'll talk about it. But it's not just for the ultra wealthy and, avoiding and optimizing estate tax. It's also for someone like me. I have 3 young children. So an estate plan, having a will, is incredibly important so that I can name, who the guardians would be should something happen to me. Without an estate plan, you can't control, right, what happens. It's determined by the court, and you obviously want to be able to control that. So that's what an estate plan is going to do for you. Can also help avoid family disputes as well. We can't sidestep all of those, but it can definitely help with providing some transparency and some clarity around your estate plan. And preserving assets for loved ones. So again, efficiently transferring wealth to the next generation or to charitable organizations that you care about. Especially needed if, again, I would say everyone needs an estate plan, but really, really at the forefront if you do have, as I said, minor children and want to name who those guardians are. You have a significant other that isn't comfortable with financial matters. I would also add to this list, and we'll discuss it today, if you have a family member that has special needs, or as I talked about for trying to reduce tax purposes, if your net worth excludes the federal exclusion, which today sits at $13.99 million. It's a very healthy amount that is excluded from being exposed to any federal estate taxes. But this could also be a lower amount depending on the state you live in. So some states have an estate tax as well. Here in Virginia, we do not, but some states do. And so it's important to think about, because it is not always, and often not, in line with that federal exclusion. So that's something to think about. You own property in more than one state, or you want to keep things as private as you can, because no estate plan, as assets pass through probate, that is a very public matter. So, some things that we'll kind of talk about today is, what is probate? Doesn't everything go to my spouse? Do I have to have the right beneficiaries? Who will call the shots if I'm not here? So who's that successor trustee or executor or guardian? Who are these key players? And thinking about that. Who's going to take care of my kids? Right. So a lot of questions that really kind of come up during estate planning, and really usually prompt estate planning to review or to implement if you don't have one already. So today we'll talk about, again, some of the basic planning concepts we'll go through today. So planning for incapacity, healthcare and how you wish to be cared for, taxes, property management, which we have a nice little house here, but really we're talking about your assets and investments as well. Giving, lifetime giving, and how that can be beneficial, whether again it's to an individual with lifetime giving or through a charitable gifting, life insurance, planning for death, wills and probates, and trusts. So again, some of those key documents we'll cover today. So let's start with incapacity. So incapacity can happen obviously at any time. I think a statistic I recently read is there's a 25% chance that we could be incapacitated. Again, not something that we want to think about every day, but we want to plan for it because that's reality. So, failing to have a plan would mean that, again, court would appoint a guardian for you. So if you're incapacitated and unable to make your own decisions and care for yourself, if you don't have someone that you've already named in place, then it's up to the court to decide who that guardian is going to be for you. Lack of planning could be a burden on that guardian. So they're stepping in without understanding, where do you hold accounts, and, how do you pay for bills, and lots of different things. So planning can ease some of that burden and that transition. And then finally, your guardian's decisions might not be what you want. So perhaps you have an obvious candidate as guardian and the court says, yes, even though without the documents, this is who we appoint. It's who you would have named anyway. If you haven't had that conversation with them, or if it isn't documented, that person still might make choices that you would not want. So here are some of the documents that you want to have in place for that case of incapacity and regarding healthcare. A living will, which is going to put in writing your wishes for how you're to be cared for. A durable power of attorney for healthcare. This lets you designate an agent to make decisions on your behalf. And these will very much vary by state. So it is something to think about too if you have recently moved or intend to move, even if nothing else has really changed in your overall, situation since you last did an estate plan or met with an attorney. If you moved, that's reason enough to revisit these documents. In a DNR order, again, what measures do you want to be taken should you need to be resuscitated? What are your wishes there? Thinking about, again, property management. So property being, again, not just your household, but really thinking about your bank accounts, your checking account, your investment accounts. What are some tools you can have in place to make this easier and to plan for it? Joint ownership is one. So I often see that, clients who are perhaps starting to care and become more involved with their parents, or if they have, kind of a young child, they'll choose to have an account owned jointly because that gives you the same access to it. So you're able to kind of seamlessly step in there. Or maybe you're, signed as a authorized signer on a bank account, whatever that might look like. But joint ownership would allow that to, for you to be able to kind of pick up and have access to that account should you need to. Durable power of attorney. So this is a document that you would draft with an estate attorney to designate, who's that agent's going to be able to make those decisions on your behalf. Do you need to start taking required distributions on their IRA or changing their investments, based on what's going on in the market? But durable power of attorney is that document that will authorize and allow you to do that. And a living trust. So this lets, if you've got a living trust, and many of our clients do have a living or revocable trust, if you've got your brokerage account in the name of that trust, for example, then in your trust documents, you've got in there who's the successor trustee. So if you are unable to serve as your own trustee, then who can step in as successor trustee to manage that property or that asset. What happens if you die without an estate plan? So assets with the joint owners, we just mentioned, they would automatically go to the other owner. So it's pretty seamless to do. If you have a designated beneficiary, which I would argue is a huge part of your estate plan, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's often something that is collected or done when you set up the account. Might not still be who you'd want today, but it is pretty common that even if you haven't sat down with an estate attorney to draft some of these documents we talk about, it's likely you might have a beneficiary on an account. And so that asset would automatically pass to the named beneficiary. Life insurance, all of these items. Anything else, all other property is going to go through probate, which is often what we want to avoid. So if you happen to own something jointly or have a beneficiary, that's okay. It's going to pass to those individuals. Everything else, we don't have a beneficiary or real estate, those items, they're going to be probated. So intestacy law does vary from state to state, to say the least. Some are notorious for being a little bit more problematic. Some are fairly easy. They all vary. Typically this shows kind of a distribution. So in this case here, this husband or father didn't do any estate planning. So typically, here's kind of how the court will divide the assets up. He's got a wife and 2 children that survive him. Wife gets half, and then, each of the children get a fourth, which could be okay. That might not be what you wanted or ideal, especially depending on the circumstances with your children, their age, and a number of things. So, if you do die without having this outlined, then, court's deciding how this is going to be. Probably goes to say there's many potential problems. Some of you might have even experienced it if you've ever had a loved one and had to handle their estate and go through probate. So let's talk about the different taxes when, again, big buzzword when we think about estate planning. And so let's kind of dive into the taxes that are related to your estate planning. So the federal gift tax exclusion. So this is an allowable amount that you can give to any individual that you would like, and it does not impact your overall estate exemption. So right now, the threshold this year is $19,000 for an individual. For a married couple, $38,000, as you can jointly give those gifts. You can write checks of $19,000 to anyone you would like, and it's not going to have any tax implications or impact your overall estate exclusion. So this is an important number, and often something we refer when we talk about lifetime giving. If you are looking to go ahead and start to transfer wealth, often clients will gift up to this amount. So an important number. Generally goes up with inflation every year. So typically see it increase just a bit. The federal estate tax. So this is imposed on transfers made at your death that are above the exemption amount. So again, this year, that exemption is $13.99 million. So anything, if you pass away and your assets, anything above that 13.99 is subject to federal estate tax, potentially state estate tax as well. The federal estate tax goes up to 40%. So there's a reason. I know that it is a big focus, and it's obviously want to avoid 40% if we can. It's a pretty big penalty or slice that they take. But again, it's anything above that 13.99 threshold. I see a question, so I'm going to go over this because it's relevant to something we just said. Is there a scenario in which a brokerage account or a bank account, both with TOD, an IRA account with the beneficiary listed, I assume those would pass by TOD, superseding whatever is listed in the will or trust? Yes, let me repeat this. I was reading it, so let me say it a little bit more clearly. The question's around if you do have TOD or transfer on death, or POD, sometimes I'll see it listed, payable on death, for your bank accounts or brokerage for a non-retirement account. Is that going to supersede what you have in your will or your trust? And the answer is yes. And that is a great question, and another reason that I really say beneficiary designations and reviewing those is a big part of your estate plan, because it can potentially conflict with a trust that you've set up or what you want in your will. But beneficiary designations do supersede what you have listed in your will or trust. So that's a great question. So Federal Generation Skipping Trust, or GST. So this is a tax that could be imposed on transfers that are more than one generation below. So if you're a grandparent and gifting to your grandchild, either at life or upon death, again, there is an allowable exemption amount as well. So as we talk about, the federal gift tax. So again, lifetime giving is how we often refer to it. So you're able to give to the donee, the person receiving it can be anyone. It does not have to be someone in your family or related to you. So any individual, you can gift up to $19,000 annually. A big question is that I often get is, okay, well, if I give above that, so let's say I do $24,000 this year, you gift to someone, so you're above your limit. Do you pay taxes on it? Not necessarily. So, if any amount that you give above the exclusion, so let's just say I'm married. So let's say I've given my $38,000 to a sibling, and this same year they have an emergency. They really need more funds this year, and so I give them another $90,000. So I've used up my exclusion, still in 2025, and I give them another $90,000. What does that look like? What are the implications? So let's assume this is the first time I've ever given above my allowable amount. What that means is this 13.99 overall exclusion that you have is now 13.9, because I just used $90,000 of that exclusion of my overall federal and gift tax exclusion. I don't have taxes on it. I will file a form. So there's an action that will be taken to document that you gave above and beyond your annual exclusion, but it isn't a taxable event because I've still got plenty more. But it does, it is a collective amount. So any gifting you do now above the 19,000 reduces that overall estate number as well. It is a combined number. The other thing to point out is, let's say you do gift above the 13.99. So you're still giving above that while you're living, and to the point where you go, okay, I've used up all of my 13.99, but I'm still going to give these gifts out. The tax that would be owed is actually paid by the donor, not the donee, which is interesting. Some people are surprised by that. Like, you're giving the money and you're also paying the tax. Yes, you are. The 13.99 is the largest that we've ever seen in our history. It is scheduled to sunset at the end of this year. So the current tax law that we have in place is on track to sunset, or should sunset if no action is taken, at the end of 2025. And that would be the same for this number as well. We would see it revert back to the 2017 number, which would be index for inflation around 7 million. So if no action is taken, we will see this reduced to approximately half of what we have today. Again, still a fairly healthy number, but a pretty big reduction. Question came in is, what is the exemption for GST? It is also 13.99. And we'll talk about that here in a second. So we've talked about kind of giving, during your lifetime, what does that look like, and considerations. Transfer at death. So let's talk about the federal estate tax. So generally this isn't going to, any transfers to spouse or to charity aren't going to be taxed, but it's anything above that 13.99 that you're going to pay federal estate tax on. Now, you do have portability, which is important to know on this, because this is 13.999 per person. So what we often see is, for a married couple, whoever is the first to pass generally leaves quite a bit of assets to their spouse. That's typically your first beneficiary, your primary beneficiary. So if you're doing that, if you're sending it to your spouse, again, that's not, using any of this exclusion. So what often happens is there's quite a bit of their unused exclusion when the first spouse passes away. Thankfully, they do allow for you to, for your living spouse, for the surviving spouse, there's a form that they can fill out, a tax return that they would do to claim their unused exclusion. So it isn't automatic, but just something to note in terms of portability, and I think we'll go into it a bit more in a few slides. Any portion of exclusion used for gifts will be unavailable to the estate obviously. So just as I talked about earlier, if you're gifting above that 19,000 or 38,000 if you're married, then that kind of eats into and diminishes your total estate exclusion. So this is referencing that. So the generation skipping transfer. So again, here is, someone had asked, so the exemption for that is also at 13.99. Unlike the gift and estate tax exclusion that we just talked about, this is not portable. But again, as you can see here, this is for, that grandparent, kind of skipping over and giving it to a further generation down. Someone asked, are tax reporting requirements in subsequent years for gifting the 90K I used for my example? No, because you're going to fill out the return in the year that you do have the taxable gift that you give, the amount above the exclusion, and then that's going to kind of carry forward. So you're only actually doing the reporting in the years that you do it, because that documents it moving forward. So it's just that 1 year. So for the federal estate tax, portability. So as I mentioned, kind of a new feature. I think portability actually came around 2011, so I don't know how new I would call it, but newer. For married couples, you do have portability, which is really, really beneficial. Again, it isn't automatic. So for that surviving spouse, they must elect to use the to kind of claim the unused spouse's exemption amount. But it is a great thing that it's available and out there. Historically, what we saw with a lot of estate planning is before portability, someone said, okay, well, if I die first, I want to make sure we're at least maximizing, my exclusion amount. And so they would often do trust planning called, AB trust, family plan, trust. So different trusts to basically say, hey, when the first person passed away, to maximize on whatever their exclusion was, go ahead and fund the trust with that amount. So that's a way to still make it available, but kind of use it. Again, now we've got portability. 27.98 can be left to beneficiaries tax-free. That's just the 13.99 doubled. So for a married couple, this is the amount that you can leave and not worry about estate taxes, federal estate taxes. And here's why, right? 40% is where they top off, and it does not, there's a very low threshold. So just imagine the majority of the assets that are above the exclusion are taxed at 40%. So, if you are, close to this, or if, we see them revert back, they do change from time to time, but if we do see them sunset this year and, going to 7 million makes you subject to it, definitely want to start to think about doing some of the gifting now and talking about strategies to reduce the impact. So lifetime giving, why would you want to do it? For the one reason we just talked about. Hey, if you're on track to be subject to paying a hefty estate tax, federal and or state, when you pass away, I would absolutely say, start to gift now and do lifetime gifting. That's one thing that prompts people. I would say more so it's because, once you've done your financial plan, your retirement plan, and it's inevitable that you're going to have assets that transfer to that next generation. Often, the big benefit, what clients like to see is to actually see your children, your recipient enjoy it now, right? Versus that, hey, upon death, it's, maybe they're in their kind of early working years, they have young children, so it might also be when they really need it most versus when you pass away. So that's usually kind of the biggest catalyst I find for clients to start doing that lifetime giving and doing that annual $19,000 per year to an individual. So it allows you to, again, maximize the $19,000 as that is not infringing on and making any reduction to your lifetime exclusion. It also removes future appreciation from your taxable estate. So if you're giving the $19,000 now, even if your children don't need it, right, to spend, to use, I often like to say, let's maximize their retirement accounts if we can, put it in a brokerage account, because now the growth from that point forward is also outside of your estate. A downside or consideration is there is no step up in basis when you do lifetime giving. So I bought shares of a stock years ago, and my basis in those shares is $1,000. That's what I paid for them. It's done really well, and so now it is valued at $10,000. So if I pass away, those assets that we're talking about, assets or investments outside of a retirement account, they get a step up in basis, meaning for my children, their new basis now is $10,000. Forget the $1,000 that was all wiped up. They get a step up in cost basis. This is not true if you're doing lifetime giving. So while I'm alive, if I give my children in kind, if I say, here you go, here's the shares, they're valued at $10,000, I also give them my basis. So they also have a cost basis of $1,000 in this scenario. Can be a really clever thing to do and can optimize taxes depending on the tax bracket of the recipient, as they might be eligible to be in the 0% capital gain rate. So not always a bad thing, and is a consideration and strategy that we like to use, but just worth noting that, if you're doing lifetime giving of appreciated shares, mutual funds, whatever it might be, if you're moving that in kind, you're giving them your basis as well. There is no step up. So transfer is excluded from the gift tax. So you can give up to $19,000 or $38,000 for a spouse. Another note is that if you are giving or contributing to a 529 plan, you can actually front load that and give 5 years worth or $95,000. So if you want to go ahead, get the money in the 529, grow in tax free, there is that exception where you can do 5 years worth at once. Now, you can't say, I'm going to put the $95,000 in today and give them $19,000 tomorrow. So you truly are using 5 years worth, but you can do it at one time for a 529 plan. If you are paying for someone's tuition directly, so maybe there wasn't a 529, you now have the ability and want to pay for your grandchildren's tuition. If you write a check directly to that university, that does not eat into your lifetime exclusion. There's no limit on that. And that's also the same if you're paying for someone's medical care. So those are two reasons that the IRS says, okay, you can give what you want. You're not subject to the $19,000. Just really important that you're giving it directly to that university, or for medical care directly to the hospital, whatever it might be. You can't just write a check to them, to the individual. So let's talk about charitable giving. So we've talked about kind of gifting to individuals and to our loved ones, but what about charitable giving, and what are some tools that are available to you? Qualified charitable distributions, or QCDs. So these have been around 2010. They are, for someone who is charitably inclined, they are really, really helpful and beneficial from a tax perspective. You're able to give up to $108,000. It was $100,000 for years, and they did begin indexing it for inflation. So for 2025, you can give up to $108,000 from your IRA directly to charitable organizations. Could be a number of them. And it's not going on your 1040. You're not going to report that $108,000 or whatever amount up to that. And you're not going to claim it as income if you give it directly to a charitable organization. It can satisfy your RMD. So we often find your required distribution. So we often find that clients will use qualified charitable distributions when they've hit their required minimum distribution age, because it can satisfy a portion of that when you hit the time where you're required to pull out. a certain percentage from the IRA, you're going to give to charity anyway. No brainer to use a QCD for that amount. You must be age 70 and a half or older to use a qualified charitable distribution. While the RMD age did change with Secure Act, so for some it's 73, many it'll be at 75, this number didn't change. So at 70 and a half, even though you aren't required to start pulling from your IRAs, you could still use a qualified charitable distribution. Or if you have an inherited IRA, if you inherited an IRA from a non-spouse, so that's a case where you often do have a required distribution. You can use any portion of that for a QCD up to this limit after your 70 and a half birthday. So very specific about that. Other ways that you can give to charity are through a charitable remainder trust. So this is an irrevocable trust where you get the tax deduction when it's funded. The income is paid to you or your heirs. And then at the end of that defined period, when you set it up, whatever remains in that trust goes to charity. So this can be great for someone who's charitably inclined, but still needs some income from the portfolio. But the organization could really use the assets now, right? So just something to think about. A charitable lead trust is the kind of the flip side of that. So this is also an irrevocable trust, but the income is paid to the charity instead of going to you or your heirs. And then at the end of that defined time period, those remaining assets go to your heirs. So your heirs are getting income now. Last beneficiary is going to be that charitable organization. With a charitable lead trust or CLT, it's just kind of flipped. So there is some income going to charity, and then at the end, the remaining amount goes to your heirs. Other ways that we see clients give are through private foundations. So when assets are donated by a family and they're invested, they are really expensive to set up and to maintain. So I have really seen kind of a trend, I feel like over the past few years, where some private foundations ultimately just kind of collapse into a donor advised fund, which we'll talk about. Maybe the heirs or the family members, aren't as interested in kind of continuing and being as involved in the private foundation. So again, I've kind of seen where a few of these have actually started to collapse into a donor advised fund. A donor advised fund, which is personally how I choose to do my charitable giving, it's a great tool. You can set it up through, we use Charles Schwab, Fidelity has them, Vanguard. But it's essentially an account where you contribute into it, ideally appreciated assets, so stocks, shares of stock in kind, or a mutual fund that's gone up in value. And when the funds go into your donor advised fund, that's the year that you get that tax deduction. So if I put in $20,000 this year, I'm getting $20,000 as my charitable deduction on my 2025 taxes. Now, within the donor advised fund, you can now gift that out to different charitable organizations in future years. So you don't have to give it out or know exactly where the $20,000 is going right away. You're able to kind of put it in your, family donor advised fund, family charitable fund, get that deduction, maybe in a year where you could, higher tax year, you could use the deduction more. And then again, kind of, give that $20,000 out as you see fit into the future. They're really easy to use and a great way to do your gifting. Or you could do obviously non-cash donations. So appreciated stock doesn't have to go into the donor advised fund. Often organizations have brokerage accounts and they'll readily accept any shares of stocks you want to give them. Real estate, obviously art and other things you can give as well and get that deduction in that year. All right. So charitable gifting, those are all things you would do and utilize while you're alive. After you pass away, charitable giving would either be through a bequest. So I often see in someone's will, it'll say a certain dollar amount to go to the church or whatever organization. So that's one way to do it. You can also set a charitable organization up or a donor advised fund as the beneficiary of an asset. So where this works really, really well is if you've got a traditional rollover IRA, right? Assets in there have never been taxed, and you can set the beneficiary up as one of the charitable organizations up as one of the beneficiaries, right? Maybe they're 5%, maybe there's a certain percentage you want to go to them versus going to family members. But when you give that traditional IRA, so if you're giving an asset that's never been taxed to the charitable organization, you didn't pay tax on it, they didn't pay tax on it. So that is, takes a little bit more detail depending on figuring out the percentages and thinking that through. But that is a great asset to leave to charity upon death. So let's talk about some of the estate documents that are common and ones that you'd want to have in place. Maybe a number of these, maybe not all of them, but a will, beneficiary designations, can't say that enough, your healthcare directive, durable power of attorney, trust documents, and life insurance policies. So these are some of the common documents we see. A will is almost always the first place that I find people start. Maybe not everyone has a trust, but I do find that often, especially for family, if you have children, you want to kind of prompt you to do the will. Let's get it set up. So a will is a very simple document that really just says in here, again, who do you want your guardian to be? How do you want your property to be distributed? If you've got this family heirloom that you really love and want it to go to your niece. Kind of that type of designation we see in there. It can accomplish other estate planning goals, but typically just very straightforward. Anything that doesn't have a beneficiary designation on it, and again, naming the guardians is your will, right? Written, signed, witness by you. Pretty simple to do. Usually very inexpensive to do as well. Most wills must be probated. So again, this is in lieu of or outside of anything that's passing by trust or beneficiary designation. So, these will go through probate court. The will is filed with the probate court. Whoever is the named executor is in charge of paying the debts, filing that last tax return, and then distributing the property as noted in the will. Make sure that family heirloom goes to great niece Nancy. The process lasts several months to a year. Again, this is really dependent upon your state and also the size of the estate. Most states have a small probate process and a large probate process. So depending on the size of the estate and where you live, it could be fairly easy. So some of the considerations for assets going through probate, the time it takes to do it, the cost. So there is typically a cost assessed based on the assets that pass through probate. There will be a fee or cost for that. Court supervision, protection against creditors. In terms of kind of the downside, again, thinking about the fees, it's public record. So there's a lot of, I think Prince was one of the big celebrities that everyone liked to talk about, right? They could never find his will. So anyone famous, if they died without a will, you can go and check out their what probate looked like for them, what their assets were. So it is a public process, public record. And again, just kind of the time to transfer, even if you go through probate and they do say, yes, these assets are going to your spouse, that's what you would have wanted anyway. There's still time for that to happen. It's very common for states to require that the that the death of the individual actually be published in a general newspaper. If there are creditors out there, to make sure that that's public information. So there's time to kind of go through that as well. Can you avoid probate? Yeah, you can. Making sure that any of your assets are titled either jointly or you've got those beneficiary designations, making lifetime gifts and using trust. One of the most probated assets is real estate or a home. And so having a trust set up so that it owns your real estate or your investment property, whatever it might be, then that's going to allow it to pass outside of probate. So it is absolutely possible to avoid probate. Another thing to kind of think about is, especially this day and age, thinking about your digital assets, right? So, if something were to happen to you or you become incapacitated, what individual knows, or if you document it in the will, wherever it might be, what are some of your login credentials for different things? If you have cryptocurrency, where are your investments, right? Where is your account? Maybe you're not ready to fully disclose with your children, okay, here's the assets, and go to that level of estate planning, talking about family wealth, but certainly let them know, here's my advisor, here's where you'd want to call should something happen to me, and having that available and let them know where it's located. So taking an inventory of digital assets, outlining your wishes for these accounts, and finding a safe storage for this information. I often see it's on this little sheet of paper in someone's house in that drawer over there, where it is. But ideally, you've either got it on a very secure online platform. That way they can access it very easily, or in a secure safe if you have a physical safe in your home. So let's talk about trust next. Again, trusts are often something I don't see set up right in someone's kind of first iteration of their estate plan, maybe when they're younger, but these are becoming very, very common, I would say, for clients to have. There's lots of different types, so I know I'm giving kind of a general, but we'll talk about that as well. They are a really versatile estate planning tool. So you can really outline your trust to say most anything. You can customize it as much as you would like. Can protect against incapacity, avoid probate, depending on the type of trust, can also possibly minimize taxes, allow for professional management of the assets, and provide safeguards, can protect assets from future creditors, and number one is control over property. So within a trust, here's kind of your key players, if you will. So you've got the grantor, the person who is setting up the trust, putting their assets in the trust. You've got the trustee, which often for a revocable living trust, the grantor and the trustee are the same while they're alive. And then the beneficiary, who's able to use the trust and who's going to receive the assets, how much and how once you pass away. And that's all outlined in your trust agreement that you have. So, once you've set up a trust, you've got the trust agreement, a really critical step that can be overlooked is actually funding the trust. So often this might be putting your brokerage account into the name of the trust, changing the title of the deed on the home into the trust. So those are really important steps once you have this trust document, is ensuring that all of the property that should, so again, property meaning real estate or investments and other items, are registered in the name of the trust. And we'll talk about there's living trust versus testamentary, and then kind of revocable versus irrevocable. So for revocable trust, again, probably the most common one that we see. It's where, you can make changes at any time. The grantor maintains ownership. So for your investment accounts, it's going to look and feel just like it did when it was your individual account or your joint account. So you still can trade it as you wish, take withdrawals. It's still taxed at your rate in terms of dividends and interest. Your social security number is still the tax ID. It doesn't have any estate tax benefits. So again, if you pass away with a $10 million in an individual brokerage account, or that $10 million is in your revocable trust, it's still part of your estate. So if you're above that 14, this isn't going to reduce or help plan for reducing your estate tax at 40%. Protection from creditors and lawsuits. So it's limited as long as you're still alive and you own it. It doesn't give those specific provisions for charity, so it's not what you'd use to set up some of those CRTs, CLTs we talked about. But it is very easy and flexible. Once you pass away, that revocable trust becomes an irrevocable trust. So that's kind of how that transitions. But we do also see, and there can be really compelling reasons to set up an irrevocable trust while you're alive as well. When you set it up, can't make changes, hence the name irrevocable, without the beneficiary's consent. The trust itself owns the assets. So as I mentioned, your brokerage account goes to revocable trust, you're still getting that same 1099. Here, the trust owns it, it has its own distinct trust ID, it's filing its own tax return. You are filing your own trust tax return, separate and independent of your personal one. Assets in the trust are excluded from the estate. So again, a reason you might want to do it while living is to go ahead and say, it's really apparent that we are going to be subject to some federal estate tax. Let's go ahead and put some assets, let's get those into an irrevocable trust. And now that growth and assets passing outside of your estate. Strong protection. Again, you would use this type of trust for those specific charitable trust and can protect beneficiaries. Legally a bit more complex to set up. Here's just a few other types of trust. Some of these we've talked about. Another one being a special needs trust. So again, if you have a family member, someone you're leaving assets to, they are special needs. A special needs trust can be crucial in making sure that you do have assets and income to provide for those loved ones, but not interfere with any government assistance that they might be receiving. So here's a couple of those. I'm going to scoot through just because I know I'm almost out of time. And this kind of goes over more details about, again, that special needs trust and why you'd set it up. A life insurance trust. So this can provide instant liquidity. That's a big reason we see it set up. Again, usually it's also to kind of cover and solve for some federal estate tax reasons. And the key is who owns the policy. So let's look at this one specifically. So for an ILIT or an irrevocable life insurance trust, you would be the insured, but the irrevocable trust, so you've set up an irrevocable trust, an ILIT trust with the attorney, you've got it set up, and that trust is the owner of the life insurance policy. You're insured, but the trust is the owner. The premiums and ultimately the irrevocable trust when you pass is going to be for your beneficiaries. The premiums that you put in there, so you make the gifts into the trust that cover the premium each year. Technically, the beneficiaries can withdraw the cash from the trust as you make the premiums. You send them a crummy letter stating, I put money in here. You've got a window if you want to pull it out. They don't dare pull it out because that is there to cover that insurance premium, but kind of a technicality that you have to have or step you have to take. When you pass away, then the irrevocable trust receives the proceeds of the life insurance, immediately. You've got that immediate liquidity. These proceeds aren't subject and don't count towards that 13.99 exclusion because you didn't own the trust, the insurance policy, the trust did. And then it can easily be immediately be doled out to your family, or to pay that federal estate tax bill if you're subject to that. So that can be a great tool to use. And here's just some great considerations before you do go to meet with an estate attorney. Who are the beneficiaries? Do you want to leave money to a charitable organization? Who do you want to be a guardian of your children? If you have a trust, who's going to be your successor trustee, right? Who I want to be guardian for my children might not be the person who also wants to manage a trust and select investments and file the tax return. So, really thinking about, who will take over, because it often is not the same individual. It could be, having them as co-trustee with the Charles Schwab or Fidelity, right? A corporate trustee, just to help. So things to kind of think about before you go into that initial meeting with the estate attorney. And there will probably be a few meetings, but these are really good just to kind of start to have that discussion and outline some of those wishes before you go in there. So some other kind of specific situations or things to think about, who are your key advisors? Do you have special needs beneficiaries? Again, different considerations there. For blended families, how are things, kind of divided up, and what does that look like? Who cares for your pets? Certainly a family business is a big reason you'd have an estate plan, so you've got that contingency all kind of lined up. And then also if you have a spouse or any beneficiary that is a non-US citizen, because there's some different rules around that. I know I cruised through that last bit very, very quickly, but thank you so much for, your time today. I hope this was helpful. I think there's still maybe a question or two I didn't get to, so I'll try and follow up with those individuals, but please reach out if you already work with us, to your advisor. Again, if you want to go over this personally and how any questions you have, or review your estate plan, or reach out if you don't work with us already and are interested in starting this discussion or dialogue with us. We would love that. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you for joining.